Okay, so here for part two of our video about how to make Photoshop layers kind of be animated in After Effects. So I showed you how to kind of just do basic stuff, open up a new project, create a new composition, import stuff. But I want to show you how to import sort of our specific Photoshop layer, Photoshop file in layers that we just completed for the demo. So here again, remember this is your project panel, and then you have the stuff that we've already kind of done, the blank composition, the one with just the piece that was in there. But we also want to bring in the full Photoshop file that we created. So if you go up here to File, Import, again, it'll let you bring your objects in so you can grab whatever it is that you would like to. And if you kind of navigate to wherever you're storing your things, this is the tutorial that I kind of went through with you all. And if I just bring this in, it's going to bring it in kind of like just the single piece that we already have in there. But what we wanted to do is bring it in kind of in pieces, right? And so if you click here on Options, it'll give you all of these options that you're able to kind of to choose, like how to import something in, right? And so if you bring it in as import it in as a composition, and you want to make sure you have that one clicked. And just again, if you don't end up seeing this stuff, you need to hit the options button, and it'll let you bring that stuff in there that way. And then you can just go ahead and just bring in and hit open there. And it's going to ask you if you want to do editable layer styles or merge layer styles into footage. That's the one we want to pick, is this bottom one here, right? And so you just click OK on that. So now if you open up this that object, the composition that we just created, right? And you have multiple like folders now, and it's got all of this stuff in there. The folder, all the layers came in that we had in Photoshop came in as just separate things that you can grab out of that folder. But the composition's already pre-made for us, and all of these, all the things that we made in Photoshop are now. I'll zoom in on that for a little bit for you. So now all of these things are, just separate items in the timeline down here, kind of like we had in Photoshop, but it's going to be editable right within the After Effects sort of workspace. And so now all of that stuff came in, and this is exactly what we want, because we want each of those things to kind of be their own entity that exists in the timeline. And so remember, in After Effects, the timeline, this, if you click the space bar, this is just going to play all the way through, right? And the timeline just lets the passage of time pass. And so whatever we tell the software to do to these layers now, it'll do over the course of time. And so you can control it. So if I wanted my arm to disappear after a few seconds, I could just do that, click play, and you can see the arm's going to disappear because I kind of cut off when it's visible and when it's not right there. So that's if you want to do frame by frame animation, that's what they do. Each frame, it lasts for a certain amount of time, usually at least 12 frames a second, sometimes more. And so yeah, you can do all those things. You can extend or bring back what happens within each layer kind of in After Effects. So this is our playhead here, and this is the timeline. And so if things aren't stacked quite correctly, like if things got kind of messed up, which sometimes they do, and of course it really, really helps if you actually will like label all of these. And if I wanted to, I could go in now and like relabel stuff. So if this thing, if I forgot to label that, I can actually just, and if you double click it, it'll bring up the layer all by itself up here in the viewer. And so don't get freaked out if that happens to you. If you get confused, you can always just click back. This is the composition, and that's just the layer. If you hit the X button here, that'll go away. If I want to rename it, I can just hold down the Control key and go down here to rename. So hit Control, click, rename, and we'll call that Torso, just so I don't get confused. Okay, so everything should be pretty much labeled, and it looks like it's kind of stacked right. I need to move the helmet all the way to the top, probably, right? What's on layer 4? Should see that. Okay, so that is left arm. Okay, so we just want to make sure we kind of have all of this kind of like logically laid out in the way you want. And if you look at this, you can see that I goofed up in my Photoshop file, right? And I ended up, I didn't cut this part of the kind of deal out, and so now it's bringing that in as this awkward looking white line here, which all I'd have to do to fix that is I'd have to go back to Photoshop and into the file, and I could delete it, and then I should be able to fix the fix it. It'll update itself automatically, because all that After Effects does, again, remember, is it places pieces of sort of code, if you will, zeros and ones that exist elsewhere. So so the Photoshop file lives in that folder that we put it into, and the After Effects is just linking to it. So After Effects is a linking program. So if I move that Photoshop file and delete it or move it to a different folder, After Effects is going to get all confused and not know what you did with it. So you want to be careful about that. But if you update, if you go in and fix something like this little problem here in Photoshop, you can it'll automatically update that and it'll be gone. So I'll do that, and then we'll see it when we come back to the next tutorial. Okay, so easy things to just kind of do really fast while we're here. And always double click the hand if you want to just resize things so that they fit into the space. There you go. So a simple way to like animate stuff in After Effects would just be to, like, let's say we wanted the this arm to kind of move around, right? Well, you could just grab the right arm, right? And if I just grab the move tool with that right now and just kind of move it around, it's gonna move that right arm all over the place, right? So I can move that back and forth. So if I wanted to kind of like animate this kind of real simply, is like a puppet almost. I can almost think of it like, where's the joint in the arm going to be for this particular thing? And so if you look at in the After Effects down here in the timeline, there are all these things I call Twirl Downs, which are just these little like triangles, right? And this one right now is pointing to the right. If you click on it, it'll point down. So it's a twirl down. If you twirl down the transform area, you can see that one of those things is the anchor point. And if I grab this, you'll see the anchor point is here in the center, right? And so if let's say I just play with rotation right now, it's going to rotate the whole layer around that anchor point. But that anchor point really isn't in the right spot for me. If I want to make this arm look like it's flapping or something, right? It's going to be kind of in the wrong place. So I actually want to change the anchor point. So I can do that here just by, if you just click on this and drag it over, I can move the X and the Y axis around until the anchor point hits where I want it to. So now, if I go to rotation, it's going to kind of look like, oh, that arm, it's like a shoulder joint, right? So you can always tweak it a little bit. One way that you can do that too is if you just hit the Y button. So just hit Y on your keyboard, it'll let you drag the anchor point wherever you want in the layer. So that's a kind of a shortcut. So if I want to place that right there, now I can put this guy's arm back kind of behind the shoulder pads, right? And then if I wanted to make it rotate, I can just, you can do that. So, and of course, if I use the move tool, I'm going to move the whole layer around. So if I wanted to move the joint up a little bit, I could do that. And so animation now is really quite simple in that there are all these little sort of places that I can tell the timeline to do things to just this particular layer. So you have the layer selected, and there are these little icons here that look like stopwatches, right? And so if I wanted to, let's say, just do a real simple animation of that arm flapping back and forth, I could click on the stopwatch here, which is going to be rotation. And when you do that, you'll see it drops a little diamond-shaped sort of, we call this a keyframe into the timeline, right? And so it says at this moment at 0, my timeline 0, 0, 0, the arm's going to be here. The rotation of the arm will be here. And then if I move it, let's say to 1 second, so I can just look up here in the timeline, and that's about 1 second. And I alter the rotation of that and move it like that. The computer is going to interpret that, and it's going to move that arm. It's going to rotate that arm from there to there. If I want it to rotate back by, say, 2 seconds, I can do that, and then I can just grab the arm back like this. So now the arm kind of does the thing. If I push play, you can kind of see a preview of it, and depending on how while your computer's RAM is working, you'll see it. It'll kind of be choppy sometimes. And if I wanted to move the arm up again to make it look, more hilariously flapping, I can, do that, and then, come back again. And so if I decide that this stuff is moving too fast or too slow, once I preview it, I can always change the speed just by moving these keyframes. So I can move these keyframes around, and when they're closer together, obviously, there's less time spaced out between the movements, and so it's going to go faster, right? So there you go. That is what After Effects is built to do. Is it just animates things on a timeline as they move along, and so you'll get the hang of this kind of as you go. But all of the variables under this transform twirl down here are keyframeable. So you can change them if you want to. You could keyframe the opacity. So if I wanted it to go, I could put it in here, drop a keyframe in there, and it's going to be at 100%. And then if I go here and I drop that down to 0, the arm's going to disappear, and then it'll come back up here, and it'll be 100% again. So the arm will kind of, it's going to fade away, disappear almost, and then come back again. So you can play with things, with one thing being more transparent than another. There's a lot of options that can be fun with this. But anything in here. So maybe the other last thing that could be useful for us would be Keyframe Scale. So if I want that arm to go from being 100% and then make it look bigger, because that would be hilarious, right? We'll just crank that up a little bit. Arm gets bigger, and then if we want it to kind of fade back to being small by the time we get to this point, you can crank it back to 100. You can always just click here and type too. So if you want to make it at 100, just click in there and hit enter, and it'll do it for you. Okay, so now the arm is going to move. It's going to get bigger, disappear, come back again. So I can add as many keyframes as I want. If you want to zoom in on this timeline so you can see a little bit better, you can just zoom in on it, and here you're looking at frames, individual frames. So that's 5 frames. This is 10 frames, and so instead of seconds. So that gives you your full. This is just 1 second right here. Sorry, 10. This is 25 frames. You're running at 30 frames a second the way we have this set up right now. So hopefully that makes sense. It's all pretty basic and straightforward, but that is the basics of changing things and animating things in the timeline. So I'll pause now and we'll start a new video in a minute.